The wind in Wyoming territory does not just blow, it scours. It comes off the high peaks of the Laramie Range with a sound like a sharpening knife, carrying the smell of iron-hard earth and pine. It flattened the grasses and tore at the false fronts of the few buildings huddled along the muddy track that called itself Main Street. Three Forks was a town built on hope and mud, and the hope was drying up faster than the mud. Clara Duval felt that wind pull the threads of her wool shawl tight against her thin shoulders. She held her son, Thomas, tight on her hip, his small body rigid. He was crying again, a thin, hungry wail that the wind snatched right out of his mouth. "Hush, baby, hush now," she murmured, rocking him uselessly. She stood outside the general store, which doubled as the post office. The stage was late, and the first snow of the season was beginning to fall. It was not the soft, fat flake snow of her childhood in Ohio. This was a mean, granular snow, like sifted salt, stinging her cheeks. Clara was 27 years old, but the last 2 years had drawn fine, hard lines around her eyes and mouth. She was a widow, and in this part of the country, in 1873, a widow with an infant and a failing ranch was a woman holding a burning stick by the wrong end. She was waiting for a man. The thought sent a wave of shame and cold nausea through her. She was waiting for a husband she had bought through the mail, like a sack of feed or a new plow blade. She had written to a matrimonial agency in Chicago 3 months back, her hand shaking so badly she'd had to start the letter twice. She'd enclosed the photograph from her wedding day, the one where she was still smiling, before Frank's cough turned wet, before the fever dream started. She had written that she was a decent woman, a hard worker, possessed of 160 acres of deeded land. She had not mentioned that the land was mostly rock and sage, or that the cabin's roof leaked, or that her cattle herd was down to 4 head. She had requested a farmer, a man of steady habits and strong back. She had written, copying the words from the agency's advertisement. A man named James Anderson had replied. His letters were brief, penned in a neat, flowing hand. He was the son of a banker, he claimed, but wished to make his own way west. He wanted land, a home, he wanted a wife. Clara had used the last of Frank's savings, the money she should have spent on winter flour, to wire the funds for Mr. Anderson's train ticket. It was a gamble stacked higher than a cord of wood. If he did not come, or if he came and saw the truth of her situation and turned right around, she was finished. The baby's cry hitched into a raw cough. She pulled her shawl tighter around him and pushed into the store. Mr. Hatcher, the proprietor, stopped sorting beans and looked up, his expression one of faint, pitying curiosity. Everyone in Three Forks knew her business. They knew Frank Duval had left his wife with nothing but a baby and a stack of debts. "Still waiting on that Chicago train, Mrs. Duval?" he asked. "It is due, is it not?" Clara said, her voice stiff. "Supposed to be, but that wind's picking up. Might be it gets held up down at Laramie." Clara nodded, refusing to let the panic show. She moved to the cold potbelly stove, pretending to warm her hands, and stared out the window. She thought of the ranch Frank had almost killed himself to build. It was barely holding on. The winter had been brutal, a solid white wall from November to April. It took Frank first, the fever burning him out in 3 short days. Then it took the herd, the animals freezing on their feet, huddled against the failing north wall of the barn. When the spring thaw finally came, Mr. Sloan from the bank in Cheyenne had ridden out. He was a tidy man in a clean suit, and he had not dismounted. He had looked at the listing barn, at Clara's chapped hands, at the new, raw mound of dirt behind the cabin. "The bank holds the note, Mrs. Duval," he'd said, his voice polite, impersonal. "Your late husband was 3 payments behind. I understand the circumstances are tragic, but the bank is not a charitable institution." He had given her 2 months, 60 days to turn the ranch profitable, 60 days to find a miracle. If the payments are not met by July 1st, he'd said, gathering his reins, the bank will be forced to begin repossession proceedings. July 1st had come and gone. She'd sold her mother's locket to pay the interest, buying herself another 2 months. Now it was October. The miracle she prayed was on that train. 200 miles south, near the border of the Colorado Territory, Cole McRae was bleeding. He was a tall man, built lean and hard, but he was running on the last dregs of his strength. His left thigh felt like it was full of hot coals. A bullet had passed clean through the meat of it 2 days ago. He lay flat in a rocky wash, the granite teeth of the land biting into his gut. He listened. There was nothing, just the high, thin scream of the wind over the ridge. He'd lost his horse. He'd lost his hat. He'd lost everything but the Colt revolver tucked in his belt and the clothes on his back. The shootout had been a mess. It happened at a Dry Gulch way station. He'd been fixing to buy a fresh horse when the three of them rode in. A bounty man named Shaw and his 2 deputies. Cole had known Shaw's face from a poster in Santa Fe. Shaw had known Cole's. Cole was faster, but not fast enough to avoid the fight entirely. When the smoke cleared, Shaw and his men were dead. But so was the 4th man, a soft-looking fella in a city suit who'd been inside the station, drinking coffee. He'd run out when the shooting started and caught a stray bullet meant for Cole. Cole was grim. He'd killed men before, men who needed killing. But this was bad luck. The man had been an innocent. Cole was wounded, on foot and bleeding. He knew more men would come looking for Shaw. He had to vanish. He limped over to the 4th man's body. The man was young, maybe 30, with soft hands and a clean-shaven face. Cole knelt, his wounded legs screaming in protest. He did not search the man's pockets for money. He was looking for a coat. The man's wool traveling coat was thick and warm. Cole needed it. As he pulled the coat free, a packet of letters fell from the inner pocket, tied with a string. Cole paused. He picked them up. The top letter was from a place called the Pacific Matrimonial Agency. Below it were train tickets to Cheyenne, and then a voucher for a stage to a place called Three Forks, Wyoming. Tucked inside the packet was a photograph. He held it up in the fading light. A woman, young, serious, with dark hair pulled back tight and wide, watchful eyes. She was not smiling. Clara Duval. The back read. Cole looked at the dead man. He looked at the papers. He looked north, toward the darkening, empty plains of Wyoming. It was not a plan. It was a door opening in a dark room. It was desperation. He had nothing left, no name, no future, nowhere to go, except the name and destination printed on these letters. He took a shovel from the way station's shed. His leg throbbed with every move, sending waves of sickness up his spine. He dragged the dead man, James Anderson, behind the small stable. He dug a shallow grave in the hard, cold earth. It was poor work, but it was better than leaving him for the wolves. When he was done, he stood over the mound of dirt, breathing hard. "I reckon you do not need these anymore," he whispered, his voice a dry rasp. "I will not let them go to waste." He put on the dead man's coat. It was tight across his shoulders. He tucked the papers into his own shirt. Next to his skin, he found the man's carpet bag, a small thing with a change of linen and a razor. He took that, too. Then he started walking north. It took him 2 days to reach the next rail stop. 2 days of delirium and biting pain. He sold his silver belt buckle for a ticket on a cattle car heading to Cheyenne. He looked like death, and no one spoke to him. The train whistle cut through the wind. Clara's heart jumped into her throat. She picked up Thomas, who had finally quieted, and went outside, squinting against the stinging snow. The train, a black iron beast trailing a plume of gray smoke, hissed to a stop. A conductor jumped down, then a few rough-looking men from the back cars. Then, from the single-passenger car, a man emerged. Clara's stomach dropped. It was not him. The man in the photograph had been of average height. with a slightly rounded stomach and a neat mustache. This man was tall, almost gaunt. He moved with a stiff-legged limp, favoring his left side. He wore a decent wool coat, but it looked slept in and was too short in the arms. He had no hat, his dark hair was matted, and a thick black stubble covered his jaw. A deep, ugly bruise stained his face from his cheekbone to his temple. He stepped onto the platform, his eyes scanning the town, quick and sharp. Like an animal's, he carried a small carpet bag. He saw her. His eyes, gray as the snow clouds, settled on her and the baby. Clara could not breathe. This was a mistake. This was a disaster. This was a dangerous man. But she was too desperate to send him away. The bank, the baby, the coming winter. She forced her feet to move. She walked toward him, Thomas a heavy weight on her hip. "Mr. Anderson," she called, her voice thin. The man looked at her for a long moment. He nodded once, a short, sharp dip of his chin. "Ma'am," he said. The voice was low and rough, like stones dragging. It held a trace of a southern accent, something the real Mr. Anderson had never mentioned. "I am Clara Duval." She tried to sound formal, steady. You do not look like your photograph." "It has been a hard journey," he said. The lie was plain, but his gaze never wavered. "I was delayed. An accident with a carriage in Cheyenne." He was lying. She knew it as sure as she knew her own name. But Mr. Hatcher was watching from the store window, and the train was already building steam to leave. She was trapped. "My wagon is this way," she said, turning abruptly. He followed her. When they reached the buckboard, he stopped her as she went to lift her basket of supplies. "I will take that," he said. He reached for the basket, and his hand passed into the light from the store window. Clara froze. The man in the letters, the banker's son, had complained about calluses from penmanship. This man's hands were not soft. They were scarred and battered. The knuckles were split, and the skin was cracked. The calluses were thick and yellowed, the kind a man got from an axe handle or a shovel, or the reins of a horse ridden too hard. These were the hands of a rancher, or a laborer, or something else. This one small, true thing gave her a strange, sharp sliver of hope, buried deep in a mountain of fear. Maybe he was not the man from the letters, but maybe he was the man she needed. He tossed the basket and her bag into the back of the wagon, his movements economical, wincing slightly as he put weight on his bad leg. He did not offer her a hand up. He simply walked to the other side and climbed onto the seat. Clara settled Thomas in her lap and took the reins. The ride back to the homestead was 10 miles. It was the longest 10 miles of Clara's life. They said nothing. The only sounds were the creak thud of the wagon wheels dropping into frozen ruts, the snap of the wind against the canvas wagon cover, and the low, steady breathing of the man beside her. He did not look at her. He looked out, his eyes constantly moving, sweeping the horizon, scanning the ridges, watching the colorless, empty land as if he expected something to rise from it. The homestead was isolated, tucked into a shallow dip in the plains that offered little protection from the wind. As she pulled the wagon up to the cabin, the isolation felt more threatening than it ever had before. She had brought a stranger to her home. Thomas, cold and jostled, sensed the tension. He woke and began to wail, his cry high and frantic, scraping against Clara's raw nerves. "Hush, Tom, hush, we are home," she pleaded, bouncing him as she climbed down. But he would not be soothed. He arched his back, his face turning a blotchy red. The man, this Mr. Anderson, limped around the wagon. He stood for a moment, just watching her struggle, his bruised face impassive. Clara felt a hot flush of anger. "Do not just stand there. Get the bags." He did not move for the bags. Instead, he said, his voice quiet, "Here." He held out his arms. "What?" The boy! Give him to me! Clara recoiled, clutching Thomas tighter. No, I will not. He is cold, and you are making him worse. He did not raise his voice. He just held his hands out, those big, scarred hands. Give him here. She did not know why she did it. Maybe it was the exhaustion. Maybe it was the baby screaming, which was splitting her skull. She hesitated, then clumsily, suspiciously, passed her son into the stranger's arms. The man turned his back to the wind, shielding the baby with his body. He settled Thomas against the solid wall of his chest. He did not coo, or rock, or bounce. He just held him. One large hand spread flat across the baby's back, the other cradling his head. Thomas's cries hitched. He rooted around for a moment, fussy, and then, as if sensing the solid, steady warmth, he went quiet. His whole body seemed to unclench. He let out a long, shuddering sigh and was silent. Clara stared. Frank, her late husband, had never been able to quiet him. Frank had always been awkward, impatient. This man, this bruised and silent stranger, had done it in 5 seconds. It unsettled her deeply. It was a tenderness, a sureness, that did not match the rest of him. "Get the door," he rumbled, and walked past her, carrying her son into the cabin. That night, the storm howled. It was a full blizzard now, a howling white darkness that shook the small cabin on its foundations. Clara had offered him a blanket and a place on the floor by the stove. It was the only place. The cabin was just 2 rooms, the main room for cooking and living, and her small bedroom. She made stew. It was thin, mostly potato and a little salt pork, but it was hot. They ate at the small pine table in silence. The only sounds were the scrape of their spoons against the wooden bowls and the high, shrieking moan of the wind. He ate like a man who had not seen food in days, fast and efficient, his head down. Clara watched him over the rim of her bowl. He was even more threatening in the lamplight. The bruise on his face was a dark, ugly purple. He was lean, but the width of his shoulders strained the seams of the borrowed coat. She did not trust him. She did not trust the way he kept his back to the wall. She did not trust his silence, or the lies he'd told at the station. But she kept seeing it, the way he had held Thomas, and she realized, with a jolt, that in the 2 hours he had been in her home, he had not looked at her. Not really. He had not looked at her body, had not sized her up as a woman. His eyes, when he raised them, were distant, tired. They slid past her and rested on the cradle, where Thomas slept peacefully near the warmth of the stove. It was a small, strange comfort. It made her wonder. "There is hot water in the kettle. If you need it," she said, gesturing vaguely at his face. He touched his cheek, as if he'd forgotten the bruise. "Thank you, ma'am. I am fine." He said little else. He did not ask about the ranch, or her, or Frank. He just finished his stew, pushed the bowl back, and nodded. "That was good. I am obliged." Clara took the bowls to the wash basin. Her back was to him. She felt every nerve in her spine prickle. She was alone, miles from any neighbor, with a man who was not who he claimed to be. "Good night, Mr. Anderson," she said, not turning around. "Good night, ma'am." She went into her bedroom and shut the door. It did not have a lock. She listened. She heard him shifting, heard the rustle of the blanket as he settled on the floor. Clara climbed into her cold bed, still fully dressed. She lay there, shivering, staring into the darkness. She thought of Frank. She remembered his cold final days. The fever had made him cruel, muttering about his failures, about the wasted money, about her. She remembered how no one came to help. The neighbors were too far, too busy surviving their own winters. She had been alone then, and she was alone now, only in a different, more dangerous way. Her hand slid under the thin mattress. Her fingers found the cold, smooth wood and steel of the Winchester. She gripped the stock. She did not close her eyes. Downstairs, Cole McRae did not sleep either. He lay on the hard floor, the wind finding its way through the chinks in the cabin walls. The warmth from the stew was fading, and the deep, throbbing ache in his leg was returning, sharper this time. He had made it. He was safe. He was inside, sheltered from the storm, with food in his belly. He pulled the blanket aside and looked at his leg. He had rebandaged it on the train, but the rough walking and the cold had taken their toll. Even in the dim light from the stove's embers, he could see the dark stain spreading through the linen. It was bleeding again. He gritted his teeth, pulling his trousers down to cover it. He had to keep it clean. If infection set in out here, he was a dead man. He listened to the sound of the woman's breathing in the next room. It was shallow, alert. He knew she was not sleeping. He knew she had a rifle. He had not meant to deceive a woman with a child. The letters had said nothing of a baby. When he saw her at the station, holding that small, wailing bundle, his first instinct had been to turn around. But where would he go? Back into the snow? Wounded? With a posse surely not far behind. He had taken the dead man's chance. Now, he was living in it. He was Mr. James Anderson, a farmer. He closed his eyes, the pain in his leg a dull, hot fire. He could play the part. He knew how to work. He could fix this woman's ranch. He could earn his keep, let his leg heal, and be gone by spring. He just had to survive the night. The blizzard lasted 3 days. 3 days of a howling, white-walled prison. The world shrank to the 4 walls of the cabin, the smell of wet wool and wood smoke, and the sound of the wind trying to claw its way inside. Clara and the man who called himself Anderson moved around each other like 2 wary dogs in a small cage. The silence was heavier than the snow piling up against the door. He slept on the floor, near the stove, and was up before her, stoking the fire. He said little, ate what she gave him, and spent most of his time watching the storm through the cabin's one greasy window. Clara held Thomas, her rifle never far from her hand, but the man showed no interest in her. His gaze, when it landed on her, was empty. He watched the child. That was the thing that kept her from barring the door to her room. When the storm broke on the 4th morning, the world was blinding white and silent. The man, she could not bring herself to call him James, pulled on his boots and the dead man's coat. "The roof," was all he said, and went outside. He was gone all morning. Clara, her nerves stretched thin, watched from the window. He was methodical. He shoveled the deep drifts away from the cabin walls and the path to the lean-to stable. He climbed onto the roof, his limp making the ascent painful to watch, and began clearing the heavy load of snow before it could collapse the sod. He worked. This fact unsettled her more than his silence. Frank had been a man of big ideas and little follow-through. This stranger was the opposite. He did not talk about work. He simply did it. In the days that followed, a pattern formed. He rose in the dark, drank the coffee she left on the stove, and went out. The steady, rhythmic thud of an axe became the new sound of her mornings. It was a solid, reassuring sound, one she had not realized she missed so deeply. He was chopping the deadfall pine up on the ridge, building a woodpile against the cabin wall that grew larger every day. He fixed the barn door. The storm had torn one hinge clean off. She had no idea how he did it, but when she went out to milk her last remaining cow, the door hung straight and true. He had reset the hinge, braced the frame, and even patched the hole where the wind had punched through. He tended the mule, rubbing its joints and checking its shoes. He patched the harness. He cleared the muck from the small stable. Clara watched him. She watched him from the kitchen window, her hands deep in dough. She watched him when he came in for supper, his face grim with cold, his hair damp with melted snow. She was wary. She noticed things. She noticed the limp was worse in the cold. He tried to hide it, but in the mornings, he dragged his left leg for the first few minutes until the blood got moving. She saw him. late one night, sitting by the dying fire after he thought she was asleep. He had a bucket of hot water and a rag, and he was cleaning the wound on his thigh. It was wrapped in torn linen, and it looked angry. She noticed how he flinched. Her old dog, Buster, a half-starved hound who was more shadow than substance, slept by the door. A rabbit bolted from the woodpile one afternoon, and Buster let out a sharp, sudden bark. The man was splitting logs. He dropped the axe and spun, his right hand flashing to the empty belt at his waist. His whole body coiled, his eyes going flat and cold as ice. It was over in a second. He saw the dog, saw the rabbit, and his shoulders dropped. He visibly forced the breath out of his lungs. He picked up the axe and went back to work, as if nothing had happened. Clara had seen men startled. She had never seen a man move like that. It was not the reaction of a banker's son. But the most unsettling thing was the boy. Thomas, who had fussed and cried for weeks, grew quiet. He was a colicky baby, prone to fits of screaming that left Clara exhausted and weeping. But the man's presence seemed to soothe him. One afternoon, Clara was trying to knead bread, her hands covered in flour, and Thomas began to wail from his cradle. The sound grated on her nerves. She was tired, she was scared, and she was failing. "Hush, Thomas, please hush," she begged, trying to bounce the cradle with her foot. The man came in from the barn, stamping snow from his boots. He stood by the door, watching her struggle. "He is fed," Clara said, her voice sharp with exhaustion. "He is dry. He just will not stop." The man walked over. He did not ask permission. He just leaned down and scooped the baby up. Thomas's cry hitched, surprised. The man settled him high on his shoulder, his large, scarred hand covering the boy's entire back, and began to walk the length of the small cabin. He did not rock him. He did not sing. He just walked, a slow, steady pace. Thud, drag, thud, drag. The sound of his uneven steps on the floorboards. In less than a minute, Thomas was quiet, his small fists unclenched. He sighed, and his head lolled against the man's neck. Clara stared, her flour-dusted hands frozen above the dough. A few days later, the boy was on a blanket by the fire. The man sat nearby, sharpening his pocket knife. Thomas fussed, rolled onto his stomach, and pushed himself up. He looked at the stranger, and then, for the first time, he lifted his arms, his small hands opening and closing, reaching for him. Clara felt a sharp, jealous pain in her chest. It was a betrayal, but beneath it, buried deep, was a profound, aching relief. About 2 weeks after the stranger's arrival, a rider appeared on the horizon. Clara saw him first. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Law? The bank? The man was in the barn. She ran to the door, wiping her hands on her apron. "A rider!" she called, her voice tight. He moved out of the shadows instantly. He looked past her, squinting against the bright snow. He stood back, in the shadow of the cabin wall, watching. "It is just Mr. Grantham," she said, her knees going weak with relief. "Our neighbor." "Stay here," he said, his voice low. He went back into the cabin. Mr. Grantham rode up, his horse puffing steam in the cold. He was an old man, tough as boiled leather, who ran a few hundred head of cattle 5 miles east. He was the closest thing she had to help. "Afternoon, Mrs. Duval," he called, dismounting. He was a formal man. "Came to see if you and the boy made it through the storm proper." "We did, Mr. Grantham. Thank you for checking." Grantham's sharp blue eyes looked past her, toward the cabin. He'd already seen the massive woodpile. He'd seen the fixed barn door. "Looks like you got yourself some help," he said, his voice neutral. The cabin door opened. The man stepped out. He had put his hat on, what was left of it, and pulled the brim low. Clara's stomach twisted into a cold knot. The lie was here. It was on her tongue. "Mr. Grantham," she said, her voice sounding thin and strange. This is Mr. James Anderson, my husband." The word husband felt like a stone in her mouth. She had said it. It was real. He arrived from Chicago just before the storm. Grantham's eyes narrowed. He sized the man up. He saw the faded bruises, the hard set of his jaw, the way he stood, balanced, even with the limp. Cole, for that was his name, though she did not know it, stepped forward. He did not offer a hand. He just nodded. "Sir." "Anderson," Grantham said, testing the name. "From the East, are you?" "Yes, sir," the man said. His voice was different. He'd clipped the ends of his words, flattening them. The southern trace she'd heard on the train was gone. Buried. Hell of a time to start ranching." Grantham's gaze flicked to the woodpile. "But it seems you know which end of a hammer to hold. That is good. She needs it." "I aim to," the man said. Clara brought Mr. Grantham a cup of water. He drank it, his eyes missing nothing. He noted the man's worn-out boots, the way his coat was too tight, the way he never stood with his back to the open plain. As he handed the cup back, he paused. "Just so you know, Mrs. Duval, there is talk. Strangers riding near the border. Saw tracks myself. 3 men riding hard north, not ranch hands. And with the army pulled out of Laramie for winter patrol, the territory is thin on law." He looked hard at the man. "You keep your eyes peeled, Mr. Anderson, and your rifle loaded." "I will," the man said. "You take care of her." "I will." Mr. Grantham mounted his horse. "Ma'am." He tipped his hat and rode away, his back straight. Clara leaned against the cold log wall of the cabin, her legs shaking so badly she thought she might fall. The lie was told. It was sealed. She had claimed this dangerous stranger as her own. That night, the tension in the cabin was thick enough to cut. Mr. Grantham's visit had changed things. The lie sat between them at the table. Thomas was asleep in his cradle. The man, Anderson, was sitting by the fire, rubbing grease into the cracked leather of the mule's harness. The cabin was quiet except for the snap of the fire and the wind outside. Clara walked to the cupboard. Frank had kept a stone jug of whiskey hidden under the floorboards. She pulled it up. There were maybe 2 inches left. She poured the whiskey into 2 tin cups. She added hot water from the kettle on the stove and a small spoonful of molasses. She walked over and held one out to him. He stopped working. He looked at the cup, then at her, his gray eyes guarded. He took it. She sat in the cabin's only other chair, a rickety rocker. They drank in silence for a full minute. The hot, watered-down whiskey burned a trail down her throat, but it was a good burn. It was warmth. "He is a good man, Mr. Grantham," she said finally, just to break the silence. "Seems so," he replied. He meant what he said about the strangers. "I heard him." Clara took another drink. The liquid courage was working. She looked at his hands, busy with the leather, those scarred, capable hands. "You are not a banker's son," she said. It was not a question. He stopped. He did not look up. He just stared at the harness in his lap. "No, ma'am, I am not." "You lied?" "Yes, ma'am." The simple, unadorned admission threw her. She had expected another story, more excuses. "Why?" she whispered, her voice tight. "Why did you come here?" He took a long drink from his cup, emptying it. He set it on the floor. He still would not look at her. He looked at the fire. "I left home," he said, his voice low. "I owed some men money I could not pay." He absently touched the faded bruise on his cheek. "They were insistent. I needed a place to go, a place to disappear. I needed a second chance." He paused. "The opportunity came up. I took it. His answer was a half-truth, but she could feel the desperation in it. It was a desperation she understood. Bad debts. She was drowning in them, wanting a second chance. Lord, did she know that? And the man? She pressed. The real James Anderson, the one from the picture. His face hardened. He did not need the ticket anymore, he said, and his voice was flat, final. It was a closing door. Clara stared at his profile in the firelight. She believed he was running from something. She believed he was desperate. It made him dangerous, but it also made him, in a strange way, familiar. She could relate to desperation, but her eyes did not soften. She could not afford to soften. You fixed the barn door, she said, rising. And you cut the wood. I am obliged for that. She took his empty cup. But do not lie to me again. He finally looked up at her. His gray eyes were clear and cold. I will not. One evening, nearly a week later, the fragile peace shattered. A man from the Cheyenne Bank had ridden out. He had not stayed long. He had not even dismounted. He had handed her an envelope, tipped his hat, and ridden away. Clara had stood by the wagon track, her fingers numb, and read the letter. 1 month, 30 days. The bank's patience was at an end. They were beginning repossession proceedings. It was final. She had crumpled the letter in her fist. Cole found her behind the barn. The sun was setting, casting long, purple shadows across the snow. The air was so cold it hurt to breathe. She was not wearing her shawl. She was just standing there, leaning against the frozen logs, shaking. Ma'am, he said, his voice quiet. He had learned not to startle her. You will catch your death out here. She did not look up. She just stared at the frozen dirt. He saw the crumpled paper in her hand. He did not need to ask. The bank? She gave a small, jerky nod. 1 month. Her voice was a dry rattle. They are taking it. After all this, after everything, Frank, after everything I did, they are taking it. She finally looked at him. Her face, in the dying light, was a mask of pale, ravaged grief. She was not crying. She was past tears. She was broken. I did everything right, she whispered. I married a good man. I worked this hard land. I buried him by myself. I had his son in this cold house, alone. And for what? For what? To be thrown out in the snow? Cole felt a strange, unwelcome pang in his chest. It was guilt. It was pity. He hated pity. It is not over, he said, the words clumsy. I can sell the mule. We? She snapped, her voice suddenly raw with a terrible, sharp anger. There is no we. There is just you, a liar hiding from God knows what, and me, a fool who is failing. She pushed herself off the wall, staggering a little. I am so cold, she whispered, but it had nothing to do with the wind. I have been so cold for so long. She looked at him, really looked at him. He was not a savior. He was not a husband. He was just a man. He was tall and solid and warm. He was breathing. I have not had a man's touch since before the baby was born, she said, her voice dropping, becoming thick. Frank, he was sick for a long time, and before that, he was not. She stopped, shaking her head, ashamed. She stepped closer to him. He could feel the desperate, trembling energy coming off her. He stood very still, like he would with a spooked horse. I do not want your pity, she said, her voice rough, reading his mind. I do not want you to tell me it will be all right. It will not be all right. She was right in front of him now. She put her chapped, raw hand on his chest, through the wool of his shirt. She could feel the solid muscle, the steady beat of his heart. I want to feel warm, she breathed. I want heat and closeness. I am so tired of being alone. I just want to not be alone for one night. Before he could answer, before he could think, before he could tell her it was a bad idea, she was on him. She grabbed the front of his coat with both fists and pulled his face down to hers. She kissed him. It was not a gentle kiss. It was not a kiss of love. It was a kiss of pure, desperate, animal grief. It was angry and clumsy and full of teeth. She was trying to climb inside him, to steal the warmth from his body. He was frozen for a second, shocked by the sudden, raw hunger. He should have pushed her away. He was a liar in her house, living under a dead man's name. But he did not pull away. His own emptiness, his own cold, rushed up to meet hers. He was a dead man walking, and this was the first thing that had felt like life in months. His arms came around her, pulling her tight against him. His body was hard and lean, and he smelled of pine and cold metal and sweat. He broke the kiss, breathing hard. His face was inches from hers. "Clara," he whispered, the first time he had used her name. "The loft," she said, her voice trembling. "Now!" She turned and scrambled up the wooden ladder to the hayloft, clumsy in her haste. He followed, his bad leg making the climb slow. It was dark in the loft. The only light came from the sliver of moon through a crack in the roof. It smelled of dry hay and dust. They came together in a rustle of hay and a tangle of coats and skirts. It was urgent. It was wordless. This was not about love or tenderness. This was about two people, pushed to the very edge, holding on to the only other solid thing in the dark. It was a collision. His hands, those scarred, calloused hands, were everywhere. He pushed her skirts up, his fingers finding her bare skin. She gasped at his touch. He was rough, but not cruel. He knew what he was doing. And as he moved inside her, as her body finally felt the shock of another, the dam of her control broke. Her grief, her fear, her terrible, aching loneliness, it all spilled out, not in tears, but in short, broken gasps. She clawed at his back, her fingernails scraping his skin, holding on as if he were the only thing keeping her from flying apart. He held her weight, his movement steady, deep, taking everything she was giving him. Afterward, they lay in the wreckage of the hay, their breath plumed in the cold air. Their skin was damp. Clara lay on her back, staring up at the dark rafters. She asked him nothing. She did not ask his real name. She did not ask if he cared for her. She did not ask what this meant. And he volunteered nothing. He just reached for the heavy wool blanket she kept up there for the horse, and pulled it over both of them. They lay side by side, not touching, and did not sleep for a long time. Over the next few days, they did not speak of the hayloft. They did not touch. They moved around the cabin and the yard as they had before, feeding the mule, chopping the wood, tending the baby. But everything had shifted. The silence between them was different. It was no longer empty. It was charged, full of the thing they would not name. When she handed him his cup of coffee in the morning, their fingers brushed. They both pulled back as if burned. Their eyes lingered. He would watch her by the fire, brushing her dark hair out, the light catching the lines of her neck. She would watch him splitting logs, the muscles in his back and shoulders moving with an easy power under his worn shirt. He began to carve. In the evenings, after Thomas was asleep, he would sit by the fire, his pocket knife in his hand. He had found a piece of smooth, pale cottonwood. He turned it over and over, his large, rough hands moving with a surprising, quiet delicacy. Clara sat in her rocker, mending a pair of the baby's stockings, and watched him from under her lashes. Shavings fell to the floorboards. Slowly, night after night, a shape emerged. It was a horse, a small, perfect toy horse, its head arched, its legs braced for a run. He was carving it for Thomas. Clara's throat tightened until it ached. Frank had never made the boy anything. Then came wash day. It was a cold, bright morning. A brutal task that involved boiling water in the big kettle outside and scrubbing laundry on a washboard until her hands were raw and bleeding. The man had ridden out, checking some traps he'd set on the ridge. He had left his coat, the dead man's coat, hanging on the peg by the door. It was filthy, stiff with mud and dried sweat. It was her duty, she thought, the duty of a wife. The thought was bitter. She took the coat down. She had to check the pockets before boiling it. Her fingers closed on the packet of papers, the ones he'd had when he arrived. She pulled them out. Her hands were wet and cold. She untied the string. There it was, the official letter from the Pacific Matrimonial Agency, Chicago, Illinois. She unfolded it, the paper crackling. Her eyes scanned the neat, flowing script. It confirmed the travel arrangements. It confirmed the name of the client, Mr. James P. Anderson. She already knew this, but seeing it in print made the lie solid, real. This was the name of the man who should be here, the banker's son, the man from the photograph she'd received, the one with the soft hands and the neat mustache, the man who had held her in the hayloft, the man carving a horse by her fire, was not James P. Anderson. She read the description the agency had provided, the one she had only skimmed in her desperation. A man of temperate habits, educated at Boston, averse to physical conflict, soft-spoken and of gentle demeanor. Clara let out a short, cold, bitter laugh. Soft-spoken, averse to conflict? The man who flinched like a gunman? The man with hands like cured leather? The man who had taken her with a desperate, silent, practiced strength? The seed of suspicion, planted the moment he stepped off that train, broke through the frozen ground and took deep, unshakable root. She did not confront him. Not yet. She folded the letter, her movements stiff. She tied the string. She put the packet back in the coat pocket. She took the coat outside, shoved it deep into the boiling, soapy water, and began to scrub. She scrubbed with a violence that made her raw knuckles bleed, trying to wash away a lie that she knew was set too deep to ever come clean. The flour sack was almost empty. The salt pork was gone. The man who called himself James Anderson knew he had to go to town. He had put it off for as long as he could. But the larder was bare, and the traps he'd set had yielded nothing but one scrawny rabbit. The boy, Thomas, needed milk, and the cow was running dry. He hated the idea of it. A town was a trap. It was a place of open spaces, notice boards, and men with questions, but he had no choice. He waited for a morning with low, gray skies, the kind that kept people indoors. He hitched the old mule, Sisyphus, to the buckboard. The mule was slow, but a man riding a fast horse drew eyes. A man on a buckboard with a list from his wife was just a homesteader. "I need flour," Clara had said, her voice flat. She pressed $2 silver into his hand. They were some of the last, and salt, and if you can, molasses. She did not look at him when she said it. Ever since the night in the hayloft, she had been distant, brittle. She moved around him with a stiff-backed caution, as if he were a loaded gun she had to live with. He had finished the toy horse, sanding it smooth with a piece of broken sandstone until it felt like polished bone. He'd left it on the hearth. Thomas had grabbed it, his small hand fitting perfectly around its neck. Clara had watched, her face unreadable, and had said nothing. Now, as he gathered the reins, she stood in the doorway, holding the boy. "Be careful, James," she said. The name still sounded wrong on her tongue. "I will," he said, not looking back. He clucked to the mule, and the wagon creaked into motion. The 10 miles to Three Forks were cold. He kept his hat low and his coat collar high. He thought about the lie. He had been living it for weeks now, and it was starting to feel like a poorly made boot, rubbing him raw in places he could not show. He had told her he was a man in debt. He owed a debt of blood, and the collectors were men who did not stop. Three Forks was quiet, as he'd hoped. A few horses were tied to the hitching rail outside the saloon, their heads drooping, their rumps to the wind. He pulled the wagon up in front of Hatcher's general store and sat for a long minute, just watching. He scanned the men on the street, 2 ranchers, an old prospector. No one paid him any mind. He limped inside, the small bell over the door announcing his arrival. Mr. Hatcher looked up from his ledger. Mr. Anderson, cold one. It is, Cole said. His voice flattened. The southern burr intentionally sanded off. He handed the list to Hatcher. Just these things. Right away. Heard you and the missus made it through that first blizzard fine. Heard you got that barn door fixed. Good work. That place needed a strong hand. Hatcher bustled off to the back room to scoop the flour. Cole was left alone in the front of the store. He did not relax. He stood with his back to the shelves of canned goods, his eyes on the windows, watching the street. His gaze drifted. The wall next to Hatcher's counter served as the town's notice board. Alongside the small post office cage, there were handbills for patent medicine, a notice for a sheriff's auction of a foreclosed property, a list of stagecoach times, and one new stark white sheet of paper. Cole's blood did not run cold. It stopped. It just ceased to move in his veins. It was a wanted poster. Even from across the room, he could read the thick black letters. $200. Reward, dead or alive. Cole McCrae. Below it, a description. Approx, 6 feet in height, dark hair, gray eyes, lean build, walks with a limp, left leg, wanted for murder, 3 counts, at the Red Rock Way Station, Colorado Territory. Considered armed and extremely dangerous. He felt the wound in his thigh give a sharp, sympathetic throb. $200. That was more money than this entire town would see in a month. It was enough to make a man's own brother turn him in. The bell on the door tinkled. Cole's hand instinctively dropped to his belt. It was empty. He had left the Colt revolver tucked under his floorboard bed at the cabin. A stupid farmer's mistake. A man walked in, stamping snow from his boots. He wore a heavy sheepskin coat and a tin star. The town deputy. "Mornin', Hatcher," the deputy called out. "Be right with you, Marshal." Hatcher's voice came from the back. The deputy grunted and walked over to the pot-belly stove, pouring himself a cup of the thick, bitter coffee that was always brewing. He leaned against the counter, sipping it, his eyes sweeping the store. They landed on Cole. It was a long, slow, casual look, the kind of look a lawman gave every stranger. He took in Cole's bruised face, his ill-fitting coat, his limp. Cole forced himself to breathe. He could not run. He could not flinch. He gave a short, respectful nod. "Mornin'." "Mornin'," the deputy said, his eyes not leaving Cole's. "You new here?" "Just in," Cole said, his voice tight. "My wife and I took the Duval place." "The Duval place?" The deputy's eyes sharpened. "You are the fella from Chicago. Anderson." "Yes, sir." Heard about you?" The deputy drank his coffee. He looked from Cole to the wanted poster on the wall, then back to Cole. Cole's skin crawled. The description was close. Too close. Walks with a limp. Left leg. The deputy's eyes dropped to Cole's left leg. Cole did not move. He met the lawman's gaze. He held it. He put all the simple, dumb exhaustion of a homesteader into his eyes. Hatcher came back in, dragging a heavy sack of flour. "Here we are. Mr. Anderson, that will be $1.30. The deputy turned back to the stove. The moment was broken. Cole's hands were shaking slightly as he fished the coins from his pocket. He paid Hatcher, loaded his goods, and walked out of the store. He did not look back. He did not hurry. He climbed onto the buckboard, clucked to the mule, and drove out of town, feeling the deputy's eyes on his back until he turned the corner. The ride home was a nightmare. The wind had a new, meaner voice. The poster changed everything. He was not just a man hiding from his past. He was a fugitive, and he had a price on his head. He had brought this to Clara's door. That $200 would be more than enough for the bank. It would save her ranch. He realized, with a cold sickness, that he was worth more to her dead than alive. He had to leave. Tonight. While Cole was in town, Clara was suffocating. The lie she had told Mr. Grantham, "This is my husband," had been a poison. It had infected everything. It made her a liar in her own home. And the letter she'd found in his coat, Mr. James P. Anderson. She had read it so many times its creases were soft as cloth, averse to physical conflict, soft-spoken. She thought of the man's hard body in the hayloft. She thought of the way he had spun when the dog barked, his hand flashing for a gun that was not there. She thought of the toy horse, carved with a skill that was both gentle and practiced. He was a web of contradictions, and she was trapped in it. She felt a terrible, sharp guilt for Frank. She had betrayed him. She had taken a stranger into her bed, a liar. She had given this man Frank's name and Frank's place. She pulled on her shawl, her movements jerky. Thomas was asleep. She walked out the back of the cabin, the snow crunching under her worn boots. She walked to the small rise behind the barn, where a simple wooden cross stood, leaning slightly in the frozen earth. Franklin Duval, 1840 to 1872, a good husband. She had carved the words herself. The last one was a lie. But you did not speak ill of the dead. "Frank," she whispered, her breath smoking in the air. "I do not know what to do." The wind was her only answer. She looked at the cold, hard mound of rocks. She remembered her husband's thin, angry face in those last days, the way he'd accused her of failing him. She had not failed him. He had failed her. He had died and left her with nothing but his debts and his child. But this new man, he was strong. He was capable. He made her son smile. And he made her feel something, a warmth that terrified her. But he was a lie. She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out the folded agency letter. Her fingers were numb. This was the proof of her sin. This was the real James Anderson. The man she had been promised. The man who had never come. She knelt in the snow. With her bare, red fingers, she dug at the hard-packed, icy dirt at the base of the cross. She dug until her nails scraped rock. "I am sorry, Frank," she whispered. She was not sure what she was sorry for. For lying? For surviving? For what she'd done in the hay? She pushed the small packet of letters into the hole. She covered it with the frozen dirt and packed the snow back on top. She buried the truth. She buried the man who should have been. She stood up, her heart feeling as cold and heavy as the stones at her feet. She was torn between the ghost of the husband she had and the dangerous living lie of the man she had invited in. That night, another storm blew in. The wind hit the cabin like a solid fist, and the snow began to fall, thick and fast. Inside, the silence was worse than the storm. Cole, she could not think of him as James anymore, had returned from town pale and quiet. He had put the supplies away with a tense, brittle efficiency. He said nothing about the trip. He said nothing at all. He sat by the fire, the way he always did, but tonight he was not carving. He was not mending tack. He was just staring into the flames, his hands on his knees, his shoulders rigid. He looked, Clara thought, like a man waiting for an axe to fall. She knew. This was the night. She put Thomas in his cradle and hummed a lullaby until his breathing evened out. She went into her bedroom. She stood in the dark for a long moment. Then, her hand reached under the mattress. She pulled out the Winchester. She walked back into the main room. The click of her thumb pulling back the hammer was loud, unnaturally sharp in the small cabin. He did not jump. He did not even turn around quickly. He just tensed. And then, slowly, he rose from his stool and faced her. She was standing 10 feet away, the rifle leveled at his chest. "You are not the man they sent," she said. Her voice was not a whisper. It was flat, hard, and cold. He looked at the rifle, Then at her face. He did not look surprised. He looked tired, resigned. "No, ma'am," he said. "I am not." His calm denial was a lit match to her fear. "Who are you?" "It does not matter." "It matters to me," she cried, her voice cracking. "I have a child in this house. I brought you into my home. I told Mr. Grantham you were my husband." "I know." "Who are you?" she demanded again. He was silent. He just watched her. "I found the letter," she said, her voice shaking. "In your coat. The real Mr. Anderson's letter." He nodded, as if that explained it. "You are a liar, averse to physical conflict, soft-spoken. You are a joke." She was shaking. The barrel of the rifle trembled. She was gripping it so hard her knuckles were white, but she could not hold it steady. She was shaking too hard to fire. She knew it, and he knew it. He did not move. He did not raise his hands. He just stood there, a tall, dark target against the firelight. "Put the gun down. Clara," he said, his voice low and calm. "You are not going to use it." "Tell me the truth," she sobbed, the tears finally coming, hot and angry. "Or I swear to God I will. Tell me who you are." He let out a long breath. "My name is Cole McRae." The name meant nothing to her, but the way he said it, like a confession of a mortal sin, chilled her to the bone. "And the real groom? Mr. Anderson? The one from the picture? What did you do to him?" "I did not do anything to him," Cole said. "He is dead." Clara's stomach turned to ice. "You killed him." "No." He shook his head. "I was at a way station, south of here. I was meeting some men I had a disagreement with." "The bad debts?" she said, remembering his story. "Not debts," he said. "A posse, a bounty man. They found me. We had a discussion. Anderson, the man from the letters. He was there, inside. He ran out when the shooting started." Cole's eyes went dark, distant. "He caught a stray bullet. He was dead before he hit the ground. It was an accident." Clara stared at him, the rifle wavering. A shootout. 3 men dead. Grantham had said, "No, the poster. The poster in town." Cole had not seen her see it. No, Grantham had warned of strangers. Her mind was racing. "So you just took his papers," she whispered. "His killers were dead, but more would be coming. I was wounded. My horse was gone. I had nowhere to go. He had a ticket, a destination, a name that was not mine. It was a chance to vanish." He looked at her, his gray eyes clear of all deception for the first time. "I took it. I buried him proper. I did not know about you. I did not know about the baby. I swear that on my mother's grave, I did not know, not until I stepped off that train and saw you standing there." The truth settled in the room. It was heavy and ugly, and it smelled like gunpowder. He was not a debtor. He was a killer, an outlaw. He had brought his gunfight right to her doorstep. Clara was silent for a long time. The only sounds were the wind and the high, thin wail of the baby, who had woken from the shouting. She lowered the rifle, the strength gone from her arms. "You should go," she said, her voice dead. Cole nodded. He had been expecting this. It was the only sensible thing for her to say. He was a danger. He was a match in a dry barn. "I know." He turned and went to his spot on the floor. He gathered his few things. The razor, the spare shirt. He put on the heavy coat, the dead man's coat. He paused. He looked at the cradle. Thomas was watching him, his small face screwed up, his eyes wide and confused, sensing the disaster. Cole looked at the small, perfect wooden horse on the hearth. He did not pick it up. He walked to the door. "Cole," she said. He stopped, his hand on the latch. "Where will you go?" "It does not matter. It is a blizzard out there. You will die." "Maybe," he said. He opened the door. and the wind and snow blasted into the cabin, guttering the lamp. He stepped out and pulled the door shut. Clara stood frozen. She heard him in the stable, his footsteps muffled by the storm. She heard the mule grunt in protest. He was leaving. He was actually leaving. He was walking out into a blizzard that would kill him by morning. A wave of panic, cold and sharp, hit her. It was stronger than her fear, stronger than her betrayal. She ran to the door, pulling it open. She did not grab her shawl. The wind tore at her hair and her thin dress. "Cole!" she screamed into the white darkness. He was beside the mule, tightening the cinch, his back to her. He stopped but did not turn. She stumbled through the snowdrift, grabbing his arm. "You lied!" she cried, her voice raw. "You lied about all of it! You put me and my son in danger! You are a killer!" "I know," he said, his voice rough. "But you saved us!" she sobbed, hitting his chest with her fist. It was like hitting a tree. "You chopped the wood. You fixed the door. The boy, he was reaching for you." She looked up at him, her face wet with snow and tears. "And I am so tired of being alone." The words hung in the screaming wind. He looked down at her. He saw the desperation, the terrible loneliness that matched his own. He saw the woman who had fought to save her home, the woman who had met him with a rifle, the woman who had come to him in the hay. Slowly, as if it pained him, he lifted his gloved hand. He reached out to touch her face, to wipe away the snow and the tears. Clara flinched. It was a small, sharp, violent movement, a recoil. His hand stopped, inches from her cheek. The chasm between them was absolute. He was a killer, an outlaw. She was a widow, a mother. Whatever had been in the hayloft, whatever had been growing by the fire, it was dead. His hand dropped to his side. He turned, swung his good leg over the mule's back, and settled himself. He looked down at her one last time. "Lock your door, Clara." He kicked the mule, and the animal plodded forward, disappearing into the swirling white curtain of the storm. Clara stood there until she could no longer hear the mule's footsteps, until her dress was stiff with ice. She went back inside. The cabin was empty. The silence was unbearable. The spot by the fire where he had sat was just a patch of cold floor. She barred the door. She went to the cradle and picked up Thomas, who was crying in earnest now. She held him, rocking, her body shaking with a cold that had nothing to do with the storm. She sat in the rocker, the rifle across her lap. Outside, distant but clear, a wolf pack howled. Sensing the storm, sensing the weakness, she checked the rifle's load. Her loneliness, which she had thought was a terrible burden, had been a comfort. This was unbearable. The lie had been awful, but the empty, honest, terrible truth, that was worse. For 2 days, the cabin was a tomb. The wind died, and the silence that settled in was heavier and colder than the storm had been. Clara moved like a ghost in her own home. The emptiness was a physical ache. The spot on the floor where he had slept was just bare wood. The toy horse he had carved sat on the hearth, a small, smooth accusation. Every creak of the house made her jump, her hand flying to her throat. She expected him to walk back in, or she expected someone worse. She had barred the door, but the cold and the fear found their way in through the chinks. She held Thomas, who was fussy and hot, his breathing ragged. He had a cold, a bad one. On the 3rd morning, she saw the rider. He was a long way off, a single dark speck moving steadily against the blinding white of the snow. It was not Grantham. Grantham's horse was a stocky bay. This man rode a tall, rangy buckskin. Clara's heart seized. She backed away from the window, her breath catching. She grabbed the Winchester from the wall, her hands clumsy. She stood in the center of the room, the rifle in her hands, and watched the door. Thomas, sensing her terror, began to cry in his cradle, a weak, wet sound that cut her to the bone. The rider did not stop at the wagon track. He rode right up to the cabin. She heard the crunch of the horse's hooves in the snow, then silence. A moment later, a heavy, confident knock echoed through the cabin. "Ma'am?" a voice called. It was deep, polite, and carried the weight of authority. "Deputy Marshal Taggart, open up, please." Law. Clara's mind raced. He had come. The man Cole was running from. Her hand tightened on the rifle. "Ma'am, I am not here to cause you trouble," the voice called again, patient. "I am just looking for a man. I can see the smoke from your chimney. I know you are in there." She had no choice. She put the rifle down on the table, but kept it within reach. She unbarred the door and opened it a crack, holding her body against it. The man outside was tall, broad-shouldered, and wore a heavy, snow-dusted coat. A tin star was pinned to his vest. His face was weathered, with sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. He was not a young man. He looked tired, and he looked hard. "Mrs. Duval?" he asked, touching the brim of his hat. Clara just nodded, her throat too tight to speak. "My name is Taggart. I am a Deputy United States Marshal. I am tracking a fugitive, man by the name of Cole McRae. Have you seen him?" The name hit her like a slap. My name is Cole McRae. The truth, which she had hated, was now a deadly secret. Her heart hammered so hard she was sure he could hear it. She had to make a choice. The bank, the $200. She could save her ranch. All she had to do was tell the truth. Yes, he was here. He went that way. But she thought of the woodpile. She thought of the fixed barn door. She thought of the toy horse. She thought of him holding Thomas, his large, scarred hand calming her son. The lie came out, thin and brittle. "No," she said. "I have not seen anyone. Just old Mr. Grantham, our neighbor." Marshal Taggart's gaze was steady. He looked past her, into the small, clean cabin. He saw the cradle. He saw the rifle on the table. "That is funny," he said, his voice mild, "because I just cut his trail, not 2 miles south of here, riding a mule, heading north. Seems he spent the storm holed up somewhere nearby, and the tracks from that mule lead right to your barn." Clara's blood turned to ice. She had no poker face. She knew her fear was all over her, plain as the nose on her face. That would be my husband," she stammered. The lie felt even uglier this time. "Mr. Anderson." Taggart's eyebrows rose. "Your husband, James Anderson?" "Yes. And where is Mr. Anderson now?" He is hunting," she said, gesturing vaguely toward the hills. "We are low on meat." "Hunting," Taggart repeated. He looked at the sky. It was a low, iron gray. "A storm is brewing. He is hunting, on a mule. In this?" "He is a good hunter," Clara said, her voice shaking. She hated this. She hated him for making her do this. "I am sure he is." Taggart did not smile. He looked at her, then at the rifle on the table. "You mind if I come in and warm myself, Mrs. Anderson? It has been a long ride." It was not a request. Clara stepped back, her body rigid. The marshal ducked his head and entered her home. He filled the room. He brought the smell of cold leather, horse, and danger. He unbuttoned his heavy coat, but did not take it off. He walked to the fire, his spurs ringing softly on the floorboards. He held his gloved hands out to the flames. Thomas let out another wet cough. Taggart's head turned. He looked at the cradle. "Your boy?" "Yes, he is sick." "That is a shame." Taggart's blue eyes came back to her. "I have been tracking McRae for 6 months, all the way from Texas. He was a deputy down in the Panhandle, till he went bad. Killed his captain and 2 other men. Then he killed 3 more at a way station in Colorado. He is a bad one." Clara gripped the back of the rocker, her knuckles white. He was a deputy. The small, true-sounding detail made the rest of his story feel like a lie. "I do not know anyone by that name," she whispered. You live way out here, ma'am, just you and the boy. And your husband, of course. Taggart walked around the small room. He looked at the single cup on the drying rack. He looked at the small, empty patch of floor by the stove. He looked at the axe by the door, its handle worn smooth. This McRae, Taggart said, stopping. He is clever, but he is wounded. One of my men shot him in the leg during that fracas in Colorado. His left leg, he will have a bad limp. Clara's stomach dropped. The limp. The wound she had seen him cleaning. My husband, she said, her voice too high. He is fine. Is he? Taggart looked at her. His eyes were full of a cold, weary pity. This man you married, Mrs. Anderson. Did you know him long? He came from the East, from Chicago. Chicago, Taggart nodded. That is a long way. Well, he sighed and buttoned his coat. It is getting dark, and that storm is closing in. I do not suppose you would object to me bunking in your barn tonight. I will be on my way at first light. Clara's heart sank. She was trapped. She could not say no. A lawman, a lone woman. It would be improper. It would be suspicious. You can stay in here, she said, her voice numb. On the floor, by the fire. It is too cold in the barn. That is mighty hospitable of you, ma'am. Taggart said. He did not seem to find it strange. He was a man used to getting his way. I appreciate it. That night was the longest of Clara's life. Marshal Taggart sat at her small table, eating the thin stew she gave him. He was polite, but his eyes were always moving. He asked questions. They were quiet, casual questions, but they felt like iron spikes. How long you been married, ma'am? A few weeks. He just arrived. And you met him how? He's not from around here. An agency, Clara said, the lie tasting like ash. A matrimonial agency in Chicago. Is that right? Taggart said, sipping his water. I have heard of those. So you did not know him before he stepped off that train? We corresponded. I see. He looked at the toy horse on the hearth. He handy with his hands? Your husband? He is a hard worker, Clara said stiffly. Thomas cried out. His fever was worse, his skin was hot, and his breathing was a shallow, rapid puffing. Clara picked him up, trying to soothe him, rocking him as she stood by the fire. Taggart watched her. He watched her a long time. You are all alone out here. Are you not Mrs. Anderson? He said, his voice suddenly soft. Clara froze. Your husband is not out hunting, is he? I do not know what you mean. I mean, Taggart said, leaning forward, that a woman like you, with a sick baby and a failing ranch, might be grateful for a man's help. Any man's help. Even a man with a limp and a story that does not add up. He held her gaze. Cole McRae is a killer. He is desperate, and he is worth $200. That is a lot of money. Enough to see you and this boy through the winter. Enough to pay off a banknote, I reckon. Clara's hands were shaking so badly she had to grip Thomas tighter. He knew. He did not know. But he knew. If you are harboring him, ma'am, Taggart said, his voice hardening. That is a federal crime. You would be an accomplice to murder. They would take this boy from you. You would go to prison. Clara could not breathe. She just stared at him, her eyes wide with terror. Taggart sighed and stood up. He was a big man, and he seemed to suck all the air from the room. I am tired. I will take that spot by the fire. He did not sleep. Clara did not sleep. She sat in the rocker all night, holding her sick. Hot sun, the rifle on the floor by her feet. Taggart lay on the blankets she gave him. His hat tilted over his eyes. But she knew he was awake. He was listening. He was waiting. At the first gray light of dawn, he was up. He pulled on his hat and went to the door. Thank you for the hospitality, ma'am. He looked at her, his face grim. She was pale, with dark circles under her eyes, clutching her baby. "That $200, he said. "It is a standing offer. If your husband should return from his hunt, you can send word to me in Cheyenne, or you can tell Mr. Grantham. He will know how to find me." He stepped out into the cold morning air. He mounted his horse, gave her one last, long, searching look, and then rode away. Clara watched him until he was a speck. Then she barred the door, sank to the floor, and leaned her head against the rough wood, her body shaking with a relief so profound it felt like sickness. Cole had not gone far. He could not. He had ridden the mule into the storm, letting the wind and snow cover his tracks. He had no plan. He was just a man walking into a blizzard to die. But the mule had saved him. The animal, with a stubborn animal sense, had turned off the plain and pushed into a deep, rocky draw in the hills overlooking the homestead. There, tucked under a granite overhang, was a shallow cave. It was not much. It was barely a crack in the rock, but it was out of the wind. He had spent 2 days there, shivering, his teeth chattering, his leg a constant, dull fire. He had the handful of dried beef and hardtack he had bought in town. He ate it slowly, a nibble at a time, washing it down with snow melted in his tin cup over a tiny, smokeless fire of dry sagebrush roots. He had watched the cabin. He had seen the chimney smoking. He knew she was all right. His guilt was a bitter, cold thing in his gut. He had run and left her to face the consequences. Then he saw the rider, the buckskin horse, the star. He had watched, his heart like a stone, as the lawman rode up to her door. He had watched him go inside. Cole had sat in his cave, helpless, his empty revolver in his lap. He had done this. He had brought the law to her. He had put her and her child in a cage with a wolf. All night, he watched the small, yellow square of her window. He saw the lamp burn. He saw her shadow, holding the baby, rocking, rocking. He saw Taggart's shadow, unmoving, watching her. He knew Taggart, not personally, but he knew the type. A bulldog, a man who would not let go. As he sat there, cold and aching, the past came back, as it always did in the dark. He had not always been Cole McRae, outlaw. He had been Deputy McRae, Texas Rangers, assigned to the Panhandle. He had been good at his job. He believed in the law. He believed in it right up until the day his captain, Eli Thorne, had ordered him to evict a family of nesters, a man and wife with 2 small children, from a piece of land a cattle baron wanted. "They will not go." "Cole," Thorne had said, his face calm, "so you will make them. Burn the cabin. And if the man resists, put him down. He is not breaking any law." Cole had protested. He filed on that land proper. "The law," Thorne had said, spitting, "is what I say it is. Now do your job." Cole had refused. He had gone to warn the family. But Thorne and his other men on the Baron's payroll, had been waiting for him. They had not just beaten him. They had held him down, and Thorne himself had shot him in the leg. "A resisting deputy," Thorne had said, standing over him. "Such a tragedy. He will be found in a week, killed by the same rustlers who murdered that Nestor family." They had left him for dead in a dry wash. But he had not died. He had crawled for a mile, his leg on fire. He had found them that night, camped by a small fire, drinking the Baron's whiskey. They were laughing. He had not been a deputy then. He was not a man of the law. He was just a thing that had been betrayed, a thing that had been murdered and refused to die. He killed them. He killed all 3 of them. His captain, his partners. He had used his knife and his bare hands. He had taken Thorne's horse, his gun, and his money. And he had run. He had been running ever since. The men at the Red Rock way station had been bounty hunters, men who had recognized his face from a Texas poster. He had killed them to survive. That was all he knew how to do anymore. Now, He watched the cabin below. He saw Marshall Taggart ride away. The relief was so strong it made him dizzy. She had not told. He had put her life, her child's life, her freedom in jeopardy, and she had lied for him. He owed her. He owed her more than he could ever repay. He stayed in the hills, watching. He saw her come out of the cabin. She moved slowly, like an old woman. He saw her go to the well. She was hauling water, 2 heavy wooden buckets. She stumbled, catching herself, and half the water sloshed out. She looked thin, thinner than she had been just days ago. Her face was pale, a white smudge in the gray light. He saw her stop and lean against the well housing, her head bowed. The boy was not with her. He must still be sick. She was alone, trying to nurse a sick child and keep a ranch alive. And he, Cole, had run from her. She picked up the buckets and started back to the cabin. She was listing to one side. She got as far as the barn, and she collapsed. She just folded, bonelessly, into the snow. The buckets overturned. She did not move. Cole was out of the cave before he had a conscious thought. He was running, sliding down the icy shale, his bad leg twisting, sending jolts of agony up his side. He did not feel it. He burst from the draw and ran across the open snowfield, a desperate, limping run. He reached her. She was unconscious. Her skin was icy, her lips blue. He swept her up into his arms. She weighed almost nothing. He kicked the cabin door open, the bar splintering, and carried her inside. The cabin was cold. The fire was almost dead. He laid her gently in her bed, pulling the heavy quilts up to her chin. He turned to the cradle. Thomas was in it, his face flushed, his breathing a fast, terrible rasp. Cole's survival instincts took over. He was no longer a lover, or a liar, or an outlaw. He was a man in a siege. He grabbed the axe and ran to the woodpile, returning with an armload of wood. He got the fire roaring, the flames jumping up the chimney. He found the kettle and filled it with snow from the doorstep. He found the dried herbs she kept, chamomile and mint. He made a hot, bitter tea. He lifted Clara's head, forcing a few spoonfuls of the hot liquid between her pale lips. She moaned, but did not wake. He turned to the boy. He cleaned him, his rough hands surprisingly gentle. He found the last of the cow's milk, watered it, and warmed it by the fire. He dipped a rag in it and let the baby suckle. He held Thomas, his small, hot body a fragile weight against his chest, walking the floor, patting his back, murmuring low, wordless sounds until the boy's rasping breath began to ease. He sat all night in the rocker. He moved between the bed and the cradle. He fed the fire. He spooned tea into the woman. He gave warm milk to the child. He was a sentinel, guarding the last 2 living things in his world. Just before dawn, the boy's fever broke. His skin grew cooler. His breathing deepened. An hour later, Clara's eyes fluttered open. She stared at the ceiling of her cabin. She was warm. The fire was roaring. She heard the sound of the rocker. Creak, creak. She turned her head. He was sitting there. He was covered in grime, his beard matted, his face gaunt with exhaustion. He was watching her. He was back. She stared at him, her mind a fog. He had come back. He had not died. He was here. He had saved her. She sat up. The room swam, but she pushed herself out of the bed. She saw Thomas, asleep in his cradle, his color better. She looked at Cole, all the fear, the lie to the marshal, the terror, the loneliness, the betrayal. It all rose up in her, a choking, bitter wave. She stumbled over to him. She raised her hand, and she slapped him. The sound was sharp, loud in the small, warm room. He did not move. He did not raise a hand to his face. He just looked up at her, his gray eyes full of a pain that was older and deeper than the red mark on his cheek. That broke her. The anger was gone, burned out. There was nothing left but the awful, aching truth. She sagged against him, her knees giving way. Her hands grabbed the front of his filthy shirt. She buried her face in his chest and sobbed. It was a terrible, racking sound, torn from the deepest part of her. "You left me," she cried, the words muffled. "You left me. I was so scared. You left me alone." His arms came up, strong and sure, wrapping around her, holding her up, pulling her close. "I know," he whispered, his voice rough as sandpaper. He buried his face in her hair. "I know. I am sorry. Clara, I am so sorry. I am here now. I am here." They stayed like that for a long time, the fire crackling, the baby breathing peacefully, the storm forgotten. That night, they lay in her bed. It was not like the hayloft. They were not desperate or angry or grieving. They were just two people, exhausted, lying side by side under the heavy quilts. Thomas slept in his cradle, close by. There were no lies left between them. They did not need to speak. There was just the sound of the wind, the occasional pop of the fire, the steady breath of the child, and the quiet, shared warmth of two scarred people who had, finally, stopped running. The quiet lasted 4 days. It was a fragile, brittle peace, the kind that comes after a fever breaks. They lived in the small cabin, the three of them, and for the first time, there were no lies. There was just the cold, the sick child, and the shared knowledge that the world was coming for them. Cole was a different man. The truth, ugly as it was, had settled him. He was no longer playing the part of James Anderson. He was just Cole, a man who knew how to fix a harness, how to soothe a child, and how to watch a horizon. Clara watched him. She had seen him nurse her son. She had seen him, pale and gaunt, collapse into the rocker, his strength spent, only to get up an hour later to check the fire. The anger she had felt was gone, burned away, leaving a strange, hard, protective instinct in its place. He was hers, not her husband, not her savior. He was just hers. Thomas's cough eased. His fever was gone. He sat on the floor, chewing on the small wooden horse Cole had carved. They spoke of simple things, the woodpile, the remaining flour. They did not speak of Marshall Taggart. They did not speak of the future. They just were. It was Cole who saw them. He was never not watching. He stood at the small window, a cup of coffee halfway to his mouth. He did not move for a full minute. Clara, who was washing the skillet, felt the change in the room. The air went still. "What is it?" she asked, her voice low. "He is back," Cole said. He did not turn. And he brought friends. Clara wiped her hands on her apron and came to stand beside him. Far off, on the eastern ridge, were 3 riders. They were not riding fast. They were moving slow, surveying the homestead. "Taggart?" "That is Taggart," Cole said, his voice flat. He pointed. "The one on the buckskin. The other 2, they are not law." "How do you know?" "I know the kind. They are bounty men. Clara, they are not here to talk. They are here to collect." He watched them for another long moment. They were not coming in. They were circling, heading for the cover of the small rise where Frank was buried. "They saw my tracks. When I came back for you, they knew I was here." He turned from the window. His face was grim, but his eyes were clear. "They are going to camp. They will wait. They will wait for me to come out for water, or wood, or they will wait for dark." The cabin, which had been a sanctuary, was now a trap. Clara's heart was a cold, hard stone in her chest. She looked at Thomas, who was happily banging his horse on the floor. "We run," she said. It was not a question. Cole looked at her, a flicker of surprise in his gray eyes. "It is my fight. Clara, I can ride out. I can lead them off. You can tell them I forced you." "No," she said. She walked over and picked up the Winchester, checking its load. "You are done running alone. We run together." He nodded, a short, sharp dip of his chin, The shadow of a smile touched his mouth. Utah territory. It is wild enough. We can get lost there, get new names. Then we go, she said. Tonight, when the moon is down. The rest of the day was spent in a tense, quiet preparation. They were prisoners under the eyes of the men on the hill. They kept the curtains drawn. They kept the fire low, so the smoke would not look unusual. They were stripping their lives down to what the mule could carry. Clara sorted through her things. There was so little. Frank's clothes, her mother's lace collar. She put them in a pile to burn. They were the clothes of a different life, a life that was now over. She went to the wall and took down the small, framed ambrotype of her and Frank, taken on their wedding day. She, stiff and hopeful, he, proud and uncomfortable in his Sunday suit. This was her anchor. This was the proof that she had been a good woman, a decent wife. She held it for a long moment. She thought of Frank's coldness, his failures, his fever-mad accusations. Then she thought of Cole, his scarred hands, the way he'd bathed her son, the way he had come back from the blizzard. She opened the door of the iron stove. She looked at the picture one last time, at the face of the man who had left her alone. Then she shoved the frame into the hot coals. The glass cracked, a sharp, popping sound. The faces bubbled, curled, and turned black. She was burning her past. She was setting herself free. Cole watched her. He went to his bedroll on the floor. From under it, he pulled the heavy Colt revolver and strapped it on. He was no longer a farmer. He was who he was. "Your hair," Clara said, her voice rough. "It is too long. Taggart will have described it." He sat in the chair. "I reckon it does not matter much now. It matters to me." She found her sewing shears. She stood behind him. Her fingers, still raw from the lye soap, touched his neck. She gathered his dark, thick hair in her fist. It was the first time she had touched him with simple tenderness. He went very still. She began to cut. The shears were dull. It was a rough job. Locks of dark hair fell onto the floor, onto his shoulders. She cut it short, shearing it close to his scalp. It changed his face. He looked harder, leaner. The scars on his face and scalp, hidden before, were now plain. He looked less like a fugitive and more like a soldier. When she was done, her hands rested for a second on his shoulders. He reached up, his hand covering hers. They stayed like that, just breathing. "There is one last thing," he said. He grabbed a pry bar from the wood box and went to the small, leaking shed attached to the cabin. The floor was packed earth, frozen solid near the door. He went to the back corner, where he had stored the mule's feed. He jammed the bar under a warped floorboard and pulled. Beneath it was a small, heavy iron lockbox. Clara stared. "What?" "My pay," he said, his voice bitter. "From my time in Texas, the money thorn, my captain, had taken from the cattle baron. Blood money." He opened it. It was full of silver coins, dollars, halves, quarters. It was a small fortune. More than enough to save the ranch, more than enough to buy a new one. "We take it," she breathed. "No," he shook his head. "It is too heavy. It would kill the mule in a day. We take what we can carry." He scooped a handful of coins into his pocket. "It is cursed, Clara, all of it." He looked at her. "But if something happens, if we get separated, you come back for it. It is yours. It is for Thomas." He pushed the box back into the hole, covered it with the board, and kicked the dirt and straw back over it. He was burying his past, just as she had burned hers. They packed the mule, flour, salt pork, ammunition, 2 heavy quilts. They bundled Thomas until he was a round ball of blankets. Darkness fell. The wind picked up, howling softly, bringing the promise of more snow. They waited. Midnight, 1 in the morning, 2. "Now," Cole whispered. "It is as dark as it will get." He unbarred the door. He peered out into the blackness. He could see nothing. The men on the hill were hidden, their fire long since dead. "I will get the mule," he said. "You be ready. When I whistle, you come out. Bring the boy. Do not run. Just walk. Fast." He slipped out of the door like a shadow, his bad leg making no sound in the fresh dusting of snow. Clara stood by the door, her heart hammering against her ribs. She held Thomas, who was warm and asleep. She clutched the Winchester. This was it, the end of her life at the Duval homestead. She waited. 1 minute, 2. The world exploded. Crack! A rifle shot, sharp and loud, ripped through the night. It was followed by a yell. "He is running! He is at the barn!" Then a volley of gunfire erupted. It was not one gun. It was 2, maybe 3. The night lit up with orange flashes. Clara screamed, "Cole!" The cabin door burst open, and Cole stumbled in, shoving her back. They were not waiting. They were moving in. "Get down!" A bullet smashed through the window, whining past her head and thudding into the log wall. Glass sprayed across the floor. Cole shoved her and the baby toward the bedroom. "In here. Get in the corner. Away from the wall." She scrambled, clutching Thomas, who was now screaming, his cries lost in the roar of the guns. Cole spun back to the door. He was a protector, a cornered animal. He saw a shape move near the woodpile. A man, not Taggart, a heavy man with a buffalo coat. Cole raised the Colt, his hand steady, and fired. The man grunted, fired back wildly, and Cole shot again. The man dropped. "That is one!" Cole yelled, his voice hoarse. He ducked as another bullet ripped through the door, striking the iron stove with a loud clang. "Cole!" Clara shrieked from the bedroom. He started to move back toward her, to barricade them in the small room. "I am coming!" He shoved her through the doorway. As he turned to follow, a bullet came clean through the thin pine of the main door. It tore through the heavy muscle of his shoulder, spinning him around. He cried out, a sharp, choked sound, and fell to one knee. The Colt clattered to the floor. "Cole! It is over! McRae!" A voice yelled from the darkness. "Taggart! Marshall! He is hit! We got him!" The shooting stopped. In the ringing silence, Clara heard footsteps approaching, heavy and slow in the snow. She scrambled out of the bedroom, the Winchester in her hand. Cole was on the floor, trying to push himself up. His left arm was useless, and a dark, terrible stain was spreading across the front of his shirt. The cabin door was kicked open. Marshall Taggart stood there, his rifle leveled. Behind him, the second bounty hunter, a thin, weasel-faced man, grinned, his own gun smoking. Taggart's eyes took in the scene, the shattered window, the dead hunter by the woodpile, and Cole on the floor, his body shielding the bedroom door, his hand reaching for his dropped gun. The marshal saw it. He saw that Cole had not been running. He had been shot protecting the woman and the child. Taggart hesitated. His rifle wavered for just a second. This was not the simple capture he had planned. This was a slaughter. But the bounty hunter had no such hesitation. "He is mine, Marshal!" the man hissed, raising his rifle, aiming at Cole's head. "No." Clara moved. She did not think. She was all instinct. She sprang from the bedroom and planted herself directly between the guns and Cole. She raised the Winchester, its barrel pointed square at Taggart's chest. "Clara, no!" Cole gasped from the floor, blood on his lips. "Get out of the way!" She did not look at him. Her eyes were locked on Taggart. The cabin was silent. The only sound was Thomas, sobbing in the next room. "Ma'am," Taggart said, his voice low. "Step aside. He is a wanted man. It is the law." "You will have to shoot us both," Clara said, her voice cracked, a thin, high sound. But the rifle did not tremble. The bounty hunter laughed. That is fine with me. We can split the reward. Marshal? Shut up, Reed, Taggart snapped, his eyes never leaving Clara's. Her face was a white mask of terror and absolute defiance. He saw the truth there, the thing he had suspected when he'd stayed the night. You want to die for a killer? Taggart asked, his voice softer, full of a strange, weary disbelief. Clara's body was shaking so hard she could barely stand, but she met his gaze. The tears she had refused to shed were rolling down her cheeks now, but her voice was strong. He is the first man, she said, her voice trembling. Whoever gave me something to live for? The words hung in the cold, gunpowder-filled air. Cole, on the floor, looked up at her, his face a mask of pain and awe. Taggart stared at her. He looked at the dead man outside. He looked at the wounded man on the floor, who was already pale from blood loss. He looked at the shaking woman, willing to die for him. He had been a lawman for 30 years. He had seen all kinds of bad, but this was something else. He lowered his rifle. Marshal? What are you doing? The bounty hunter, Reed, snarled. I am ending this, Taggart said. He turned his cold blue eyes on Reed. We are pulling back. We will wait for daylight. Let him bleed. He is right there. We can take him. I am the law here, boy, Taggart said, his voice pure iron. And I say we wait. Go back to the camp. Reed looked from Taggart to the $200 bleeding on the floor. He cursed, a long, foul string of words, but he backed away, retreating into the darkness. Taggart stood in the doorway. He looked at Clara, then at Cole. You have got 1 hour, he said, his voice flat, all the weariness of his life in it. Then I come back for the report. He turned and walked away into the dark. The sound of his footsteps faded. Clara dropped the rifle. It clattered on the floor. Her legs gave out, and she fell to her knees beside Cole. He is letting us go, she whispered, her hands hovering over the bloody hole in his shoulder. He is, Cole gasped, his face gray. But we have to move. The other one, Reed, he will not wait an hour. You are bleeding. I know. She ripped his shirt open. The wound was deep. It was high, but it was bleeding fast. The bed! Get on the bed! She hauled him, half dragging, half carrying him. He collapsed onto her mattress. She ran to her sewing basket. She grabbed the bottle of whiskey she had used to clean his leg wound. There was only a little left. This will hurt, she said, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold the bottle. Just do it. She poured the whiskey into the wound. Cole did not scream. His whole body went rigid, his back arching off the bed, a low, animal groan torn from his throat. She threaded a needle with shaking fingers. Hold on. She began to stitch. It was a nightmare, sewing a man like he was a ripped feed sack. The needle was slick with his blood. Her hands were covered in it. He was pale, his eyes closed, his breathing shallow. Do not you die, Cole McRae, she whispered, her voice fierce, stitching and pulling, stitching and pulling. Do not you dare die on me now. When she was done, it was an ugly, puckered line. She bandaged it with strips torn from her own petticoat. He was weak, drifting in and out of consciousness. We have to go, she said, pulling him up. He was a dead weight. She pulled his good arm over her shoulder, taking his weight. She dressed Thomas, wrapped him in the quilts. She grabbed the bag of supplies they had packed, the one that seemed to have been packed a lifetime ago. It was snowing, hard. The wind was sharp, but the snow was a blessing. It was a white curtain, dropping from the sky, covering their escape. Taggart had given them an hour, and the heavens had given them cover. She dragged Cole to the mule. He was barely conscious. Cole, you have to climb. I cannot lift you. He roused himself, his face slick with sweat despite the cold. He grasped the mule's mane, used his good leg, and somehow, grunting in agony, pulled himself onto the animal's back. He slumped forward, his head resting on the mule's neck. Clara strapped the baby, wrapped in his blankets, to Cole's front, tying the quilts around his body. "Hold him," she commanded. "Hold on to my son." Cole's good arm came around, securing the bundle. Clara took the mule's reins. She had the Winchester strapped to her back. She looked at the cabin one last time, the broken window, the dark bloodstain in the snow by the woodpile. She turned her back on it. She did not look at Frank's grave. She stepped out, leading the mule, leading her bleeding outlaw and her sleeping son, together into the falling, forgiving snow. The flight from Wyoming was a blur of white and pain. The snow that had covered their escape was a merciless, frozen sea. It fell for 2 days, and when it stopped, the world was a vast, blinding, silent expanse. There was no track behind them, no cabin, no Marshall Taggart, no grave. There was only the wind, the mule, and the cold. Cole stayed on the mule, mostly. He was weak, burning with fever from the wound in his shoulder. He slumped forward, his good arm locked around Thomas, who was a warm, living bundle against his chest. Clara walked. She led the mule, her small, dark figure the only thing moving in that entire white world. She held the reins in one raw hand and the Winchester in the other. They moved west, always west, toward the empty, unknown land of the Utah Territory. At night, she would find what little cover she could, a rocky overhang, a thicket of pine. She would build a small, smokeless fire. She would ease Cole off the mule, his body a dead weight. He would groan, his teeth chattering, his eyes glassy and unfocused. "Clara," he would whisper, his voice a dry rasp. "I am here," she would say, her voice steady. "I am here." She tended to him. She boiled snow in their small pot. She unwrapped the crude, bloody bandages. The wound was ugly, red and swollen. She washed it, her touch firm. She tore more strips from her last petticoat, rebandaging it tightly. She spooned hot, weak broth into his mouth, made from the last of their salt pork. When he slept, he did not rest. He twitched and moaned, lost in the fever dream of his past. She would check on Thomas, who, by some miracle, slept soundly, tucked into a nest of quilts, his face plump and peaceful. Then she would sit, the rifle across her lap, and watch the darkness. She was not a wife. She was not a widow. She was a guard. She was a mother to them both. After a week, the fever broke. Cole woke one morning, his eyes clear. He was gaunt, his new shorn hair and thick beard making his face look like a skull, but he was himself. "Clara," he said, his voice weak. She was packing the mule. She turned, her face impassive. "You are back." "How long?" 8 days, she said. "The snow has stopped. We are in the Utah mountains." He looked at his shoulder. The bandage was clean, the dressing neat. He looked at his hand. It was clean. He looked at Thomas, who was sitting up in the blankets, chewing on his own fist. He was clean. He looked at Clara. Her face was chapped raw, her lips cracked and bleeding. Her hair was matted. Her dress was torn and filthy. She had not slept. She had not eaten. She had given everything to them. He tried to sit up, a wave of dizziness and gratitude so strong it almost choked him. You saved us." "We saved each other," she said, turning back to the mule. "Can you ride?" "I can ride." They found the settlement 2 weeks later. It was not a town. It was a dusty, wind-beaten collection of shacks and tents in a high desert valley, huddled around a muddy creek. It was called Deep Creek. It was a place for men who did not want to be found, prospectors, trappers, and men whose pasts, like Cole's, were best left unexamined. It was perfect. They found a rented shack at the far end of the settlement, a one-room cabin built of cottonwood and sod. It was mean, and it was small, and the wind blew right through the walls. but it had a door that locked and a stove that drew. They introduced themselves as John and Clara Walker. Walker, for the walking they had done. John, for its simple anonymity. The handful of coins Cole had taken from the lockbox was just enough to pay the rent for 2 months and buy a sack of flour, beans, and a side of bacon. They were poor, they had no luxuries, but they had peace. At first, it was a skittish peace. Every time a horse rode hard into the settlement, Cole's hand would drop to the colt that he now wore everywhere, even inside the shack. Every time a stranger knocked, Clara would stand by the axe. But no one knocked. No one was looking for a poor carpenter and his wife. Taggart had let them go. The snow had covered their tracks. They were in this empty, raw territory, new people. Life settled into a rhythm. Clara took in laundry. The settlement had a small, dirty population of miners, and they paid in dust or coin for clean clothes. She worked from sunup to sundown. Her hands, which had been raw on the trail, were now perpetually red and boiled. The skin cracked from the harsh lye soap. She worked at a scrub board by the creek, even when the ice was thick on the edges. She was fierce, and she was proud. She was earning their keep. Cole, his shoulder healing stiffly, found work. He was a good carpenter. His hands, which had been so good at destruction, were even better at creation. He mended wagons for the freighters. He built chairs and tables for the new saloon. He built coffins. He was quiet, he was reliable, and he was fast. Men called him Walker and left him alone. The boy, Thomas, grew strong. The dry desert air agreed with him. He was not a fussy baby anymore. He was tough. He learned to crawl, then to pull himself up on the rough-hewn legs of the table Cole had built. His first word was not "Mama." It was just a sound. Company, that he made when Cole walked in the door, his small arms reaching up. They lived in the small shack. They ate beans and bacon. They slept on a straw mattress on the floor, all 3 of them together. Cole on the outside, then Clara, with Thomas tucked between her and the wall. But the past did not die. It just slept. Some nights, Cole would wake with a yell, sitting bolt upright, his hand grasping for a gun, his eyes wide with a terror that was not for the present. Clara would be awake instantly. "Cole, it is me. You are here." He would be breathing hard, his body slick with sweat. I saw him," he'd rasp. "Thorne. He had the family, the nesters. He was laughing." She would not say anything. She would just take his hand, the scarred, calloused one, and hold it. She would put her other hand on his chest, right over his heart, letting him feel her warmth, her presence. "You are in Deep Creek," she would whisper, her voice a low, steady anchor in his dark. "You are John Walker. You are a carpenter, and you are here, with me, with Thomas. You are safe." He would lean his head against her shoulder, his big body shaking. She would hold him. She would hold him until the blackness faded, until the sun began to paint the high desert peaks with pale light. She would hold him until he was Cole again. One night, after they had been there for months, they sat outside the shack. The air was cool, and the sky was a deep, impossible, star-filled purple. Thomas was asleep inside. They were tired. Clara had spent the day boiling miners' clothes. Cole had spent it framing a new assay office, his shoulder aching from the hammer. They sat on the small bench he had built, not touching, just watching the stars. "Do you regret it?" he asked, his voice low, quiet. Clara looked at him. His profile was hard in the starlight, the lines on his face deeper than they had been in Wyoming. "Regret what?" she asked. "Lying to the marshal? Losing the ranch?" "All of it," he said. "Choosing me. This nothing. Living in a mud shack. Your hands, I see your hands. Clara, they are bleeding. You were a landowner. You were a proper woman." She was silent for a long time. She looked down at her hands, red and scarred in the dim light. They were the hands of a survivor. She reached out and touched his hand, the one that had killed, the one that had carved the horse, the one that mended her son's cradle. "No, Cole," she said, her voice soft but fierce. "I do not regret it." She turned his hand over, tracing the lines on his palm. "I regret not doing it sooner. I regret all the time I spent being a proper woman, being afraid. I was dying in Wyoming. I was cold, and I was alone, and I was dead. I did not start living until you fell in my barn." He looked at her, and his gray eyes, which had always been so guarded, were overwhelmed. Spring came, the snows melted in the high country, and the creek ran full and fast. The ground thawed. Hope, which had been a frozen seed, began to push its way up. They had saved every penny, every flake of gold dust, the handful of silver from the lockbox, and the coins they had earned with their raw hands. It was not much, but it was enough. They bought a tiny piece of land, 5 acres of dusty, rocky ground just up the creek from the settlement. It had nothing on it but sagebrush and a handful of struggling cottonwoods. But it was theirs. No bank held the note. No one could take it. Cole began to build. He did not build a house first. He built a fence. He cut pine from the hills, and one plank at a time, he built a fence around their land. A solid, simple, strong fence. While he built, Clara worked the ground. She broke the hard, dry earth with a rented plow. She pulled rocks until her back screamed, and she planted potatoes. It was a humble, ugly, tough crop. A crop that would grow anywhere. A crop that would feed them. One evening, as the sun was setting, they sat by a small fire on their own land. The fence was half built. The rows of potatoes were just green nubs in the dark earth. Thomas, who was walking now, a sturdy, toddling boy, was asleep on a quilt near the fire. Clara was humming an old lullaby, her voice low and a little off-key. As she mended one of Cole's shirts, Cole sat, watching her. He was not carving, he was just watching. He watched her face in the firelight. The lines of worry and exhaustion softened. A small, quiet smile on her lips as she hummed. He looked at his son, safe and sleeping. He looked at the patch of dirt they owned. He was overwhelmed. The feeling was so strong, so sharp, it was almost pain. This was real. The dirt, the fire, the woman, the child. After a lifetime of running, of blood, of ghosts, this was the only thing that had ever felt real. "Clara," he whispered. She looked up, her needle pausing. "If I die tomorrow," he said, his voice thick, "if some man rides in, I want you to know, this was the only life, the only part of it that ever felt real." She put the sewing down. She crawled over to him on the quilt. She put her chapped, strong hands on either side of his face. She looked into his eyes. "You are not dying," she said, her voice full of a strength he had come to depend on more than air. "We are just getting started." She kissed him. It was not the desperate, grieving kiss of the hayloft. It was not the fearful, forgiving kiss of the reconciliation. It was a kiss of promise. It was slow, and it was deep, and it was real. The story ends, but it does not really end. A few days later, Cole was working again. He was not building the fence. He had a piece of smooth, wide pine, and he was carving. Clara came out from the small tent they had pitched, carrying a bucket of water. She stopped. He was working on a sign. He was carving letters, deep and sure. She walked up and read them. It did not say Walker. It did not say McRae. It said Duval Homestead. He had taken her name. He had given her back her home. He looked up at her, and he smiled. The wind carried the high desert dust across the horizon, just as it had in Wyoming. It was a hard, lonesome land, but inside the small patch of ground, inside the circle of the half-built fence, There was warmth, there was breath, and there was a chance, hard-won and precious, at love. Thank you for listening to this story around our campfire. Let us know your thoughts, and please comment with where you are listening from, so we can all connect. Be sure to subscribe to the Wild West Campfire channel for more stories like this one.